Don't just recruit, build thriving volunteer communities. I'm Claudia, Marketing Manager at Rosterify, and today we have two special guests, Chris Wade, a leader and consultant in the UK charity sector, and Matthew Cobble, Head of Volunteering at the MND Association. So Rosterify recently launched a new resource, the Volunteer Recruitment Playbook, a guide designed for organisations navigating modern volunteer recruitment pressures. If you haven't downloaded this yet, there's a QR code on screen here where you can access that guide. And what we've been doing is hosting a series of webinars exploring some of the key themes. So today, Chris and Matthew will be sharing their advice for building active, engaged volunteer communities. You'll see a question box in the top right corner of your screen. So please send any questions through there and we'll answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation. I'll now hand over to Chris and Matt to get us started. Thank you.
Thanks, Claudia. Hi, everybody. Nice to be here. Those of you who don't know Time for Impact, we're a volunteering consultancy doing all kinds of things around volunteering, helping you build your strategy, organize your structures, your culture, survey your volunteers, measure the impact of your volunteers, and many things. But we also run the Time for Impact podcast, and it's actually, this is a first, Matt, I think, beyond the podcast where we've actually done a presentation together, because Matt, as well as being the head of volunteering at the MND Association, is my co-host on the Time for Impact podcast. But this isn't a podcast, but we thought it's a good opportunity to plug it here while we're here. So if anybody's not already listening to the podcast, and why wouldn't you? It's a free resource about volunteering. The QR codes are on the screen. Can't remember which is which, but one of them is Apple Podcasts and one of them is Spotify. And I think Claudia will be sharing the slides afterwards. So if you're not quick on the draw with your camera, there'll be another chance to find us through the QR codes, or just look us up on wherever you get your podcasts. But in the podcasts over the last few years that we've been doing it, one of the recurring themes that comes up quite a lot is this concept of building communities. In fact, lots of our guests in one way or another tend to reference the importance of not just thinking about roles, but building communities of volunteering. And this is just one example. Janet Thorne, if you've not come across Reach Volunteers, do make the effort to search them out. They've got some brilliant work. But also they buck the trend in a lot of their work in terms of the gloom that we see about people struggling to recruit volunteers. And that Janet is very clear that the reason they do that in a lot of their works with clients is because they encourage their clients to be very purpose-led, very participatory and involving volunteers as almost partners and as a community in their organizations. Likewise, we spoke to Elena Laguna, who was at St. John's, now independent, and she talked very much about that volunteering being an act of sort of collaboration, coming together around a shared purpose and a shared problem, and trying to solve issues that we're concerned about in our communities. So it keeps coming up. So for us, why do we focus when we're talking to clients so much on building communities? Most of us, I guess, have seen a graph that looks a bit like that, whether you're in England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, or further afield. There are similar graphs that show that formal volunteering, whether that's regular or irregular, has been on a bit of a downward trajectory for many, many years. And volunteering recruitment is expensive, it's laborious, it's time consuming, and very unproductive very often. So we need to make sure that when we're looking at this, we're coming at it from the right angle. And one of the things that we've discovered over the years is that, volunteers, they want to be part of something. They want a sense of belonging and connection to an organization. People may sign up for a role, but actually the thing that keeps them in the organization is often that sense of connection. And volunteering is very sort of kind of relational. It is transactional, and we talk quite a lot on the podcast, Matt, don't we, about volunteering being transactional. People, volunteers get as much out of volunteering as they put in, but at the heart of it, volunteers are involved because they want to work with the people, because they're passionate about the cause. They feel that their time is being valued. So it makes sense to us to build belonging, inclusion, a sense of value into the volunteering proposition, the volunteering activity. Because we know people are driven, as I said, by impact and not necessarily tasks. But most of the advertising we see around recruitment is, or a lot of the inductions that we see, is very much focused on task, not so much on that relational stuff. And if we think we need to shift the dial on that a little bit. We know that volunteers want flexibility, they want agency, they want to do volunteering in a way that suits them, when it suits them, how it suits them. So we need to build in that flexibility. And we know that volunteers, like the rest of us, have probably had enough of being micromanaged at work. And we don't want to come and give our spare time to be managed in a very sort of orderly fashion. We want to be able to use our imagination, flexibility. And people, how can I say this? People, but when people leave an organization, when they leave a volunteering role, it's not because they've fallen out of love with the organization. It's because it's because the role doesn't suit their lifestyle anymore. They've moved on, they moved to a different area, their college course is finished, their health is deteriorating, they've got caring duties. None of those things typically mean that they've kind of lost an affinity with the organization. That stays. Yet we often let volunteers move away when that happens and lose that connection, lose that belonging with an organization, because we're focused on the task, we're focused on the role, not on the connection with the organization. So one of the things we work an awful lot at is how do we engage people to stay connected even when they're not volunteering with us, so they keep coming back time and time again for a small or large commitment ways of getting involved in the future. Because after all, it's much easier to engage warm audiences than it is keep engaging cold, unknown audiences every time. So Matt's going to tell you a little bit about how that kind of thinking applies to the MND Association.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I guess I wanted today to try and bring some of this idea of sort of community building to life, and some of the things we're doing at the MND Association, or some of the thinking we're trying to apply around this. It's probably worth me being clear from the outset. We don't have all the answers to this. We don't have this, we don't have this working perfectly. But what I hope I can talk about today is some of the things we're trying, which we think, edge us towards more of this idea of communities, and some of the things that are sort of inspiring our thinking at the moment, and some of the things we're looking to build on. I thought it would be important to touch on already, at the start, really, like why this community mindset is really important to us at the MND Association, and why it's important to us both as an organisation, but why it's also important to me as a head of volunteering. So, like many volunteer involving organisations, the MND Association relies on thousands of volunteers in local communities to do a huge range of things for us, from campaigning, fundraising, providing sort of services and support in local communities, things like running support groups, things like visiting people with MND, things like running branches and groups, which are, for us, are not physical offices or locations. They're sort of collections of small, community-led volunteer groups in local communities that are sort of to some extent self-organizing and self-managing. So all of that stuff really enables the MND Association to do what it does. That's how we deliver our strategy. That's how we provide support. That's how we raise funds. That's how we raise awareness. It's all through volunteers. And that's vital to us. It's a key part of our DNA. It's how we were started, but it's who we are. And I'm sure there'll be others listening today that will resonate from that kind of approach. Some of you will have similar approaches to how your organizations are structured. What that means for us is that if we rely on that volunteer base to really deliver our strategy and help us deliver our mission, both nationally and in local communities, we need to respond to this, because the nature of volunteering is changing. So there is a part of this which is like, if we want to continue to stay the same in the sense of delivering our strategy, delivering our mission, being present, we need to think about how we're going to change around some of this, because volunteering is changing, and we're going to have to engage with and attract people in new and interesting ways. But we want to do that whilst preserving the stuff we know works and we know is important to people that give their time and benefit from our services and support as well. It's a really difficult balance. Some other stuff that's just really key to kind of us, who we are, is that the nature of what we do at our organisation, like lots and lots of other organisations, but supporting people with MND is is a deeply emotional, complex, and very human thing. Lots of the people who give their time to us are people who've been affected in one way or another by MND in their lives. There are others as well who bring their skills, professional skills, but you know, a lot of what we do is about human connection. And so if you then come back to communities, being part of a community is also really about human connection. So we need our volunteering to feel like it's about and part of human connection. It's kind of a real link with the drivers and motivations of our volunteers. Many of our volunteers don't show up because they want to, you know, share a skill or they want to do a task. Some of them do, but most of them show up because they have this deeply personal connection and feeling about MND and wanting to make a difference. And being part of a community is a much more natural way of delivering that than doing something that feels like a job. And it's really important, I think, this mindset shift around how we deliver impact to communities is, you know, we don't really do it to them. This isn't something we do to people. This is something we do through them. And I think that mindset shift is really important for us as an organization. Actually, you know, it means we start to think about our branch and group network in particular as quite a different thing. This isn't just seeing volunteers as kind of commodities. It's about really thinking about and leaning into the assets that exist within those local communities and how we leverage them. So there are there are a huge amount of skills, experience, knowledge in our local community networks, not just about local communities and how to show up and be visible and be present and to reach people there, but also the huge amount of lived experience that comes with that as well. So yeah, delivering sort of through communities rather than to communities is an also really key sort of mindset shift if you're thinking about volunteering as a community. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, I'm just trying to move the slides. There we are. Got there in the end. One of the things we talk about a lot is creating shared purpose and a sense of shared urgency to take action, I guess. We often, my experiences in organizational life is we often put people in categories because it's convenient for us as organizations to say these are fundraisers, these are donors, these are campaigners, these are volunteers. But the truth is all of those people share a purpose in our organizations. They're all connected to us because they want to make a difference, because they believe they have an affinity with the cause. They want to change the injustice that's going on in society or whatever it is affecting to your organization. And they often see themselves as volunteers or campaigners or fundraisers. They see themselves first and foremost as supporters, yet we put them into different kind of categories and sometimes make things far more complicated than they need to be. The truth is, when we talk about volunteering, we're talking about how do we engage those supporters to make them more actively involved in our organization, and the ways they can get involved are far more flexible and far more varied than the set roles that we often put down for them. And the more we can get into the mindset of understanding that people bring different skills, different perspectives, different lived experience to that challenge, that shared purpose, and the more that we can help people buy into a shared purpose, the more that we find that they can bring those skills and those talents to bring new perspectives, new ideas, generate new solutions to the problems we have. Not least because Matt has said they're often very tied into the cause or tied into the local communities that we're working on. But also we tend to put people in roles. They do that for a few years. Maybe they get burnt out. Maybe their life changes around them, and then they leave the organisation. But what we often encourage people to do, or our clients to do, is to build like a ladder of participation. So better too if you can do it with fundraising or with other teams in your organisation, just to understand what the journey is for a supporter in terms of their active involvement of an organization. They may be volunteering with you for a long while and then they need to leave. Do we want them to step off that ladder and never get involved in the organisation again? Or do we want to have a conversation with them and keep the door open for ongoing dialogue so that they stay connected to the organisation, maybe as a donor, maybe as a fundraiser, but maybe volunteering in very small ways by writing to their MP, running the occasional ad hoc project for you, sitting on a project board, finding other ways where people can dip in and out of volunteering and building that supporter journey so they stay part of a community seems really important to us. But always keeping them focused on how do we take all these different people and connect them to the shared purpose, and they all contribute in different ways at different times. And some of that's a bit of a mindset shift from that kind of thinking of a sort of human resourcing model. We're managing volunteers as if they're effectively unpaid staff. They do a role, they have policies and procedures, they have to fit in certain categories and do things at certain times. That's often really important in an organisation. Like in Matt's world, if you're working with people with health problems, people who are vulnerable, you need to have some frameworks around that. But beyond those roles, there are often lots of ways where people can get involved if you take that citizen shift, mindset shift, so that you start to see them as partners rather than people providing services. If you take that lens, then we can start to think of them as sort of sharing in the challenge and working with us and co-producing solutions with us and bringing new skills or new outlooks or maybe a local community perspective to what needs solving. If we can think and enable people to think outside the box and get involved in those ways, just more focused on the shared purpose and less on the task at hand, then we start to empower communities to find solutions that otherwise would have been hidden from us.
Thanks, Chris. So I thought it would be useful to add a slide here around sort of what some of our ingredients for a thriving community are at the MND Association. And as Chris has talked about already, having this kind of shared purpose and shared direction is really, really important for us, but also allowing a degree of kind of flexibility within that as well. So I often talk about this as kind of this idea of sort of flexibility within a framework. We have a shared purpose and direction. We have a framework that sets us up to keep us safe, keep us legal, keep us on the tracks, as it were, but also trying to create the space for people to be their own community, to make some of their own decisions, and to find the space where it is safe for people to be creative, but all of that being joined up by this kind of overall shared direction and purpose. And what I would say to that for those of you that are listening from sort of volunteer involving organizations that have a sort of dispersed network like we do, but also if you don't, if you're more of a sort of a location-based volunteering offer or however you show up, I suppose, really try and invest the time in communicating and building connection between your volunteer base and whatever your strategy or organizational direction is. That's really, really key, that people sort of buy into that and you're on the same page. Because I think when there's a mismatch from that, sometimes that's when you can see challenges. And I think from my experience, the best communities, they have this, one of the things that makes them powerful is that they have this shared sense of direction and purpose. Leadership is also really important as well. So great communities have great community leaders, and I'm sure people on the call now, if you're in a volunteer involving organization, you'll probably be able to think off the top of your head of some brilliant volunteer leaders in your communities. That's a really key part of the recipe here, and we need to support and invest in those people. We need to make sure people have connection with each other so that different parts of that network are talking to each other. The best kind of communities, again, in my experience, or natural communities, are not ones that are sort of directed always from the top down. People have power and agency to be creative, to establish, priorities, what they're going to focus on, what they think is important to them. Carving out the space for that is really key. Thinking about how you do that and how you give the space for that is important. And I think that's something that we've not given enough time and space to in recent years. We've focused a lot on trying to be safe and compliant and follow the rules, and that's great, but perhaps at the expense of, you know, our communities feeling empowered. So I would encourage you all to find the space and give some priority to that kind of stuff. I think also impact and not just activity is important. So when we do some of our volunteer surveys, some of the highest scoring metrics are about people making a difference, you know, and I think, or feeling like they're making a difference, as it were, sorry. And I think that's a really key part of communities. They don't, you know, they don't necessarily count their success in the number of volunteering hours given, or in the sort of the number of beans counted, so to speak, or, you know, I think trying to articulate and understand better the impact that community makes and communicating that back to people is going to help them feel more like a community that is an agent of change, and will help all these other bits connect together as well. So taking a bit of time to sit down and think about what is the impact your volunteer community creates, how can you understand that a little bit better, and how can you communicate that back to people is really key. And some of you on this call might already have really sort of sophisticated ways of measuring and understanding that impact. Great. How can you communicate that? If you're sitting here going, I feel like we're a really long way from being able to communicate the impact, I would say that, you know, start small and think about some of the really basic things you can do to do that. So, you know, we didn't have a really sophisticated system to do this, and to some extent still don't really, but we, you know, taking some of the most basic things we can measure through things like surveys and bits and pieces like that, you know, can really help people to understand the difference. So start small, communicate what you find, and it will help people really feel like they're making a difference and make them feel like they're part of a community making a difference as well. Thanks, Chris.
It's still you, I think.
So I've started to touch on this kind of flexibility within a framework as well. Frameworks give us safety, they give us clarity, and as we all know, being clear is being kind. So having frameworks is really, really important. And I think, you know, having rules, having expectations, having all of that kind of stuff, having all of that kind of structure around volunteering doesn't stop a community feel. It's 2026. We know what the external environment is like out there. We do require structure. We do require safeguarding. We do require health and safety. So all of that stuff is really important. But have a think about how those frameworks also enable creativity, enable connection, enable people to, in the right spaces, come up with their own ideas and knowledge. And I think that's a balance we really try and walk at the MND Association, which is, if I take an example of our branch and group network, we have sort of an agreement that I guess provides the rules and structures around how we expect those local networks to operate. And there are expectations around that, and we do try and manage them quite closely. But on the side of that, we also don't want that framework to be sort of stifling to local needs and local creativity. So when we update it, we try and engage volunteers in those conversations. We also try and allow space for that creativity and flexibility around some of those things, because that local knowledge and connection is really important to who we are and what we do. So, as I've mentioned, try and have really clear policies and processes, but also accept, I think, that not everything needs to be the same, and it's okay for variation in a volunteering network that feels like a community. That means there will be differences, and I would say kind of lean into that and celebrate that, because that's how you become more responsive, that's how you become more creative, and that's how you become more innovative. And all of that starts with people understanding the things that need to be the same, so they can understand more clearly where things can be more different, flexible. I've talked a little bit about leadership as well. So again, great communities have great leaders. I will bang that drum a lot. I think leadership, as I say here, is a multiplier for good and for bad, and we've certainly experienced that at the MND Association. So when we're working well and effectively with the volunteer leaders in our community of volunteers, we can achieve absolutely brilliant, amazing things. And being frank, my job can feel quite easy and pleasant on those days. When we haven't always engaged well or effectively with our community leadership, or where that relationship has been more challenging, that can make all sorts of things feel much more difficult. So what I would say is it's really, really important to think about and invest in leaders. These are the people that convene people around that shared purpose. These are the people that make it feel like a community. And I think one of the things I've experienced quite a bit is, like, we often expect great leadership, but we don't often support or equip it that well. It'd be interesting on this call to have a think, how many of you, in organizations have experienced sort of leadership development as an employee? How many of you have experienced leadership development as a volunteer? Leadership is important to both paid work. It's also really important to volunteering, and something I'm really passionate about personally, and what we're trying to do more of at the MND Association is really invest in our volunteer leaders and support and enabling them to be great, brilliant leaders for the organization in the right kind of way, that works for them and is appropriate to their volunteering. So some of the ways we've been working on to try and do this. So one of the things we've created is a kind of leadership forum at the MND Association. What does that look like? So for us, that involves bringing our the leaders of our branch and group network together, quarterly basis, in person at the moment, to build a sense of shared leadership, to really treat these people like leaders, to talk to them like leaders, to use the language of leadership, and also to give them the information they need to be effective leaders, and also to involve them in some of the conversations and some of the organizational shaping opportunities to do that. So leadership is really key. If we equip them, they will go back to their communities and be brilliant leaders in those communities. The other thing around this is also trying to invest in volunteer leadership and management. And we've done quite a bit of work on this in recent years. And I think, we did quite a lot of work in setting this up. And I think it's something we need to get a bit back to more at the MND Association, but really trying to invest in the people who are leading volunteers locally. Again, treating them like leaders, supporting them to be leaders is really, really key. And again, happy to chat to anyone around this call as to some of the things we've done or some of the things we're planning. But if you can find the time to support volunteer managers to develop and hone their skills, or support them to be great leaders, that will help with your community building.
And it sounds like you built a community of leaders as well.
Yeah, I suppose there's a chance to do that as well. Yeah, for sure.
So not everyone can be leaders, but not everyone can be always volunteering in the sort of formal roles that we put in place. And sometimes it's quite difficult for organizations to think of ways to involve people. But also, I think volunteer managers feel an obligation to be creating all of these opportunities for people to get involved. Where sometimes this is about providing a space where people find their own way to participate. But I find this crib sheet quite useful for just thinking about how we can engage people when they're not always on in the formal volunteering space. The most obvious one very often for many of us, because of the causes that we work with, is telling the stories. We have lots of people who have lots of experience as a volunteer, maybe as a service user or lived experience of your cause, who are really powerful at telling stories, whether that's just something very quickly on social media or whether that's something more formal, talking to a group. Hopefully they're already raising funds, your supporters, but are they generating ideas? That you may have 100 staff and 6,000 volunteers or something. Are you leveraging all those volunteers and those supporters and their ideas, and making sure that the good ones are brought to fruition, or that local solutions aren't held back by national kind of bureaucracy? Clearly they provide services. They are fantastic campaigners, but they're also connected to the local community. There were no funders, there were no other volunteers, there were no decision makers, and they're very, very good at co-producing solutions to problems that you might have in your community. So I think it's just useful sometimes just to have a framework that says, well, actually, how do we get people involved when they're not doing what we think of perhaps more sort of regular volunteering? This is you, Matt.
Thanks, Chris. So I put this slide in because I think one of the things we are really lucky with at the MND Association is, that there is already quite a sense of community in our organisation, because a lot of our volunteers are united by a kind of shared experience. But we also work quite hard to sort of try and maintain that sense. So we want people to feel like they are part of our community when they come and volunteer with us. And so there are things we need to do to try and maintain that, or to try and build on that. What we try and do and what we try and think about quite carefully is our volunteering. So I guess one of the challenges that some of the role-based volunteering we have can sometimes feel quite transactional. It can sometimes feel like a job. But we all need some kinds of volunteering opportunities like that, right? So, at the MND Association, we're as guilty of anyone of having quite involved role profiles and role descriptions. And I think for the right roles and the right opportunities, we need that stuff. But we also have stuff which really doesn't feel like that. And we also have opportunities where people probably wouldn't even consider themselves as a volunteer, even though we would. Our campaigns network is a real classic example of that. We have tens of thousands of people who essentially are on a mailing list, and we email them periodically to ask them to help us with things like writing to their MP or sharing something on Facebook and bits and pieces. So those kind of people wouldn't necessarily consider themselves as volunteers, but we have a different range of opportunities to explore on that. We're also exploring at the moment more kinds of opportunities for what I would call like ad hoc volunteering. So how can we extend that mindset of you sign up and you're essentially on a mailing list to other kinds of sort of more lower risk, more one-off, more micro actions in other areas of our volunteering, which is quite exciting and interesting for us. I think we try and create the space for community moments, as I would call it, and try and make sure these are always shared with our volunteer community, even if they're not directly part of it. So in recent years, we've seen things like sort of the Rob Burrows story and the Kevin Sinfield challenges that have come at the back of that. Now, I think one of the things we've been able to quite successfully do is make sure that those moments feel important for all of our volunteers. And that means we need to share and communicate about them. We need to share the story. We need to tell people what is happening, and we need to find ways that they can be involved in those key moments. So we're quite one of the things we do at the MND Association is we have a 2-weekly e-newsletter. Some of that e-newsletter is stuff that we need volunteers to do or we need them to act on. We try and keep that to a minimum or proportionate at least, but we also really try and share like these moments that are going on as part of the wider organization that they are part of, that they belong to, and really try and draw out the connection to them and the time that they give and why that is important for them and how they can feel part of it. Other moments we've had in recent years, we did a campaigning activity where we took an ice sculpture to Parliament Square, which demonstrate, we were campaigning at the time around access to a treatment, particularly, without going into all the details on that. But again, sort of leveraging these big moments or these moments that your organization has that everyone can feel part of, again, I think helps community build. We also try and measure what matters, as I said, and I touched on this earlier about, for us, a really key metric is, do people feel like they're making a difference? And I'm really pleased to say that 93% of people feeling like they're making a difference is our highest metric in our volunteer survey, and is something that we really, we're really proud of. Obviously, if people feel like they belong and they feel like they're able to make a difference, hopefully that does make them feel part of a community. And we try and create all the opportunities we can to celebrate individual and collective achievements as well. We're bringing volunteers together for a recognition event later this year. I'm sure lots of you will do moments like that. But, you know, at that event, there will be lots of language around community and being part of a community and the achievements of our community of volunteers. That's really important. We also do more individual stuff as well. You know, and we'll be sharing stories and bits and pieces throughout Volunteers Week, which is coming up, which again, I'm sure lots of you will do. And we're really trying to leverage that so that we're able to more proactively share those stories of impact and difference throughout the year, so people can celebrate each other as well. And you know, I think that's another important feature of a community, which is it isn't just the sort of the central organization, the top down telling people they've done a good job, but also trying to create a culture where people within that community thank and recognize and celebrate each other. And so we're trying to create more space and opportunities for that to happen as well.
Brilliant. I'm conscious of time, so I won't labour this, but I just think it's worth a reminder to that communities aren't just about geography. Clearly, we've talked quite a bit about communities of interest, and hopefully that's an interest around your cause. But it might be interest around, as the example Matt kind of alluded to, which is rugby. You know, there might be a community of interest could be built up around rugby fans because of the connection to that particular disease and so on. But there are communities of faith that we can build up. There's certainly online communities that we can look at, communities of experience and lived experience, communities of identity, profession, kinship, all worth exploring. Can we bring people together who both share an affinity for the cause that we work for, but also a professional or a kinship connection as well? And can we bring people together and build some connections so they can work together with us on that? So a lot of those are online communities that can work really, really powerfully on, especially on micro tasks and campaigning.
The last slide from me really is about this idea of kind of a revolving door of volunteer recruitment, I suppose. And one of the things that we've been thinking quite hard about is the idea of how we create roles and opportunities that are more flexible, that people can move in and out of. And I'm sure a lot of people listening to this call are also thinking about that. We haven't cracked this, right? And it's probably fair to say that. I don't think we've quite got the answer yet to how we sort of fully realize kind of flexible volunteering. But I think it's something we really need to strive towards and we think about, and it's something that's always at the front of our mind when we're designing roles, when we're designing opportunities, when we're thinking about how people can get involved. And one of the shifts that's really helped us in that is thinking less about volunteering and more about involvement, as Chris has talked about early on. Or participation, sometimes we call it, which is there's lots of things that people do that aren't, you know, or may not always traditionally be called volunteering, but are active participation in the organization. And we're trying to sort of scoop some of that stuff up and understand some of that stuff a bit more, you know, and think about what the things are that build lifetime connections for people with organizations. What we want really is a menu of different kinds of involvement that people can pick up and put down when their lives change or when, you know, things are going on in their world, so that they really can feel part of something. So what does that look like for us? So multiple ways for people to contribute. I've already talked about some of that stuff already, from low commitment and high commitment. We're trying really hard that when we look at our processes and we look at changing things around, that they enable flexibility. So one of the things that I'm really keen we look at in our next round of system development, for example, is how we pause people on our volunteering systems and databases. I'm sure Rostify have got a brilliant system for that, by the way. But you know, how you enable people to pause, because pausing and starting and stopping is really important. You know, if we're going to have volunteering that looks like a revolving door that people can constantly come in and out of, and less like a prison cell that they're trapped in, we need to find a way of you know, enabling them to move in and out without them having to go through really clunky login, cumbersome, you know, enrollment processes every time they want to, you know, re-enter through our organizations. Again, we've not cracked it, but we're really invested in trying to sort that out and solve that problem, and it's a key challenge for us. And I suppose what I would say is, like, with this mindset, we've seen a real shift. So in 2020, we do a volunteer survey, like a big one every 2 years. When we asked our volunteers questions about flexibility in 2021, 69% of them said they felt it was flexible. That's jumped right up to 87%, and it's consistently gone up year on year since we've done that. So it makes me think that, you know, this mindset shift and some of the practical things we're doing are having an effect in that area, and hopefully we'll continue to see that improve in the future.
Marvelous. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a a whistle stop tour in just under 45 minutes on thinking around community, and certainly how that's been applied by Matt and the team at MND Association. I'm sorry we've really left so little time for questions. This is just to say that if anybody wants any help with surveying their volunteers, similar to as Matthew's just described, there's a product from Time for Impact that can give you a cross-sector comparison of your volunteer experience with others. But yeah, Claudia, sorry, I don't know if we've got time for one question or anything, but
for sure, yeah,
I'm sure we can hang around for a few minutes if people can as well, but
no worries. Yeah. Thank you both. Plenty of great ideas and advice shared there. So yeah, we'll take a look at a couple of questions. One here, how do you communicate your volunteer strategy and organizational direction with your volunteers? That was something you mentioned, Matt. So I guess what channels are you using?
Yeah, so there's a few things we do, and there's more work to do in this area, I think is probably worth saying. So having a regular email touch point is really key, but that's not the only way to reach people. And you know, and I think there's some messages that are hard to deliver through email, but nonetheless, it is one of the key channels. Our leadership forum has been really key in that. Our leadership forum is one of those spaces where we've been really able to work with, again, talking about those community leaders, to help them understand the strategy a bit more and have like a two-way communication a little bit about that. The other thing we did is we did some what I would call like road shows. So we went out and about with our strategy to, you know, to try and be a bit closer to branches and groups in local communities and provide a bit of a platform to talk about that a little bit more. So so I went out, some of our directors went out and things like that and talked about our strategy and where we were going in the overall direction. There's definitely more work for us to do in that, in terms of building that connection, and it's a constant piece of work, but is really key. The other thing I would say is if you can really try and anchor things you are talking about to volunteers back to the strategy consistently, that also helps build understanding. It's like, we're doing this, or we're talking about this, or we're sharing this because it's part of our strategy, or this thing has happened and it's a great example of our strategy in action. Being able to always make that link back in communications is also key, without it sort of over-egging the pudding.
And also co-producing, you know, I mean, it may not be co-producing the strategy on a regular basis, but co-producing the solutions and so, you know, articulating the challenges, not necessarily the solutions, and allowing volunteers to be part of the work to find a link between strategy and action, I think is often very powerful.
Great advice. We'll answer one more question, because conscious of time, but obviously spoke a lot about micro and ad hoc volunteering, and that's such an important part of building communities and finding different ways that people can support your cause. But how do you balance flexibility for volunteers with operational reliability?
That's one for you, I think.
Yeah, okay. So I think there is there needs to be an honest take on this, which I think is like, some roles, it's very, very difficult to make them very flexible. So I give an example of this. So our association visitor role is a role we have at the MND Association. It's basically a visiting service. It's people that go into the homes of people with MND, providing them with emotional support, linking them to information. It has quite a structured training program. There is an ongoing training commitment. It has quite a defined role and role description. It has quite close supervision and management. Making that role flexible is not something we're really, you know, is really totally on the cards for us at the moment. We're interested in elements of flexibility, but ultimately there is a whole sort of stuff around, there's a whole set of things around that make that the wrong place to play with flexibility, because of a lot of kind of safety and practical implications. So we need to have structure where it's right and operationally sensible to have structure. But there are other places, let's take that campaigns network I talked about, where actually it's really ripe for flexibility. And we do other stuff as well around sort of our community fundraising has quite a lot of pipelines with Facebook challenges and bits and pieces like that. So I think it's about trying to get the right kind of flexible approach in the right bit of the organization and the right opportunities, put the right piece of the puzzle in the right space for it. Don't try and make things that don't really work with a high degree of flexibility super flexible, because I don't think you'll be totally successful and you'll bump into those operational issues. But think creatively about where it is the right place to apply these in the organization. They will exist. And be excited for that, because that's your place where you can sort of play and innovate and build that. And those lower, more flexible opportunities are probably your pipeline for moving people through into perhaps some of those more higher involvement, higher commitment roles. Really, really quickly, one brilliant example of this, because it's an innovation from our community. One of our branches has, through trying to recruit more volunteers, has come up with this really interesting model where they basically ask people to, instead of asking them to sign up for a role, they ask them to sign up to support them 3 times a year, but they're quite non-specific about what that looks like, which is really interesting. And basically that is all about asking them to come to events so they can talk to them about volunteering. So all they're really trying to do is get them to say, will you come to something where I can talk to you a bit more about volunteering? That's not really what they say. They give them an opportunity to make a difference. Maybe it's a bucket collection, maybe it's something kind of quite low impact, but it's really innovative. It's come from our community. It's community volunteering in action, which is volunteers meeting other volunteers with a shared interest, shared purpose, connecting with each other. But it's also to some extent this solution to flexibility and operational delivery is like, let's be flexible where we can be flexible, let's be more structured and rigid where we need to be, and let's build pipelines for people to move from one to the other.
I love that. It's a great example, great way to open the door to more people. We're at time, so we'll leave it there on that note, but a big thank you to Chris and Matt for the presentation, and to everyone who's joined us on the call today. We hope you enjoyed it. And a couple of people asked about the recording. You'll all get an email with a copy of the recording and the slides, as well as links to the volunteer recruitment playbook and our upcoming webinars. We've got one next month on corporate volunteering with Loris from Alzheimer's Society, so keep an eye out for that one. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.